Hi, everyone. So we still have 15 minutes before the session starts. So please feel free to ask questions. Anything related to on-prem Active Directory security, Azure security, or similar. Please note that I would be able to pick questions only on Discord. So write your questions on the Discord chat. So no questions? If you have problem with your OneDrive link, just log out from the lab portal once and log in again. Please make sure that you ask all the questions only on the Discord channel. I wouldn't be able to look at the chat during the session. Right now, I can answer a couple of questions from there. One is, do we need all the videos prior to the session? No, you don't need all the videos. Please ask your questions on the Discord channel, not on the Zoom chat. Because the reason for that, of course, is during the session, it is easier for me to look at only one chat window. The bigger reason is we do not remove these Discord servers after the bootcamp is over, so that you can come back and look at the questions in message history. Would the tools be available for exam? No, when you start the exam, you have to copy over the tools that you require. Usually, I suggest to not copy over the complete tools.zip, but only the tools that you require. In this class, are we going to do only on-prem AD exploits? Yes. So a couple of questions that I can pick up right now from the Zoom chat. Once again, won't be able to do that once the session starts officially. A question is, may I ask a recap for the materials and labs? What we need to start and follow in the best way? Yes, I will do that. I will give a quick walkthrough of the lab portal and how you can connect. No, not how you can connect, but how you can use the materials, etc. Another question is, I come from a network admin role and I'm going to take EJPT in 2 days. Is that background enough to take best of the course? Or you should be fine. You should be absolutely fine with that knowledge. All right, so Any idea why the full data parameter is not working? I believe, Kazmi, in the current version of Power View that we are using in the lab, it already shows full data. It's not a valid parameter anymore. Full data was used in Power View 2. What we are using in the lab is a bit of modified version of Power View. Right. So now I have to start not answering the questions from the Zoom chat. Please make sure that you take a look at the frequently asked questions. Right. Okay, let me check for the OneDrive link. I can see that it is actually working fine, right, from an incognito mode. We changed the OneDrive because we, during the day, I believe, or in fact, yesterday, we hit some hidden limit. I mean, it's not listed anywhere that there is a limit on OneDrive. So we have changed the OneDrive link that was already present in the lab portal. So just log out and log in again. If the link still doesn't work, just copy the link and start and open it up in an incognito window. Thanks a lot, Exploiter. Another question is, do we need materials in this session? So what I expect you from in this session is to pay attention to what I'm saying. You may like to have a copy of the slides open so that it is easier for you to follow through. Please absolutely do not try to do the hands-on with me. I do not expect or recommend doing that. Right? So you have tried to absorb what we discussed during the session and try the hands-on later. And that is the reason that you have a continuous lab access. Are there any attacks that are instructor only, or can we try almost all? You can try everything. You can try everything. Thanks of this being an on-prem class, we have a lot of control, a very tight control over the environment. There is no internet access. So yeah, please feel free to try whatever you want. So a question is, will you be going over the lab manual / learning objectives, and then we can try it on our own after? Yes, Jake, that is the idea. Now, Seth, you can either reach out to the lab team or DM me your email. So that could be the reason. I can ask my team to check both for you, Seth and Letek. So if you're still getting that item no longer available, could you please contact the lab team for that? They will be able to quickly check it for you. I would suggest not to do that. Let me share the link if it is required. So if I try that one, Okay. Those of you who are facing any issue, could you please tell me, do you see this type of lab portal or do you see more options here? For example, Luckbox, Lethac, Safe. Do you see this lab portal or do you see more options here? You see that, and when you click on the access lab material, you do not, yeah, and are most of you able to access it? That's what it is. Just go on access lab material here. Okay, let me paste. Thanks Hype for that. Let me paste an invite there. A question is, using web-based access to connect to the lab VM, does that have any drawback compared to using VPN? Tops, if you're used to use Guacamole, because that is what we use for web-based access, then you would be fine. In case of VPN, you RDP to the student VM. So copying and pasting stuff is usually easier. That's the only benefit. In fact, in the case of the web-based access, there is no way that anyone could connect back to your host machine. So if you're absolutely paranoid about security of your host machine, then you may actually like to use the web-based access. The question is, can we switch from VPN to web-based and vice versa? Yes, you can, but you would be able to access the student VM using just one of the methods. Not simultaneously, absolutely. Records. Once you log into the lab portal, click on this link, access lab material, and you would be redirected to the OneDrive. If you continue facing issues, please contact the lab team. Just give me a second. Excuse me. So another question is, what is the Covenant lab manual? So there are two ways you can access the lab, or not access the lab, you can approach solving the lab. One is that we discuss in the slides, and that is what I discussed, using individual C# scripts, PowerShell scripts, Microsoft tools, etc., to target the target environment, to break into the target environment. Now, other than that, you may also like, if you want, let's say, to use a C2 framework, for example, Covenant, then the Covenant lab manual lists or details step-by-step ways of solving the lab using Covenant C2 framework. So that's what the Covenant lab manual is. Right? Another question is the exam living off the land based or covenant works as well? Everything. I mean, we have had students who have used anything from Cobalt Strike to Covenant to Sliver and whatnot. I mean, it depends on how comfortable you are. But if you're using a framework, please make sure that you explain what, let's say, a particular command does. You are free to use patchable, vulnerable, uh, not exploits. I mean, you feel free to use exploits in the class as well, but please make sure that you explain the vulnerability well if you're using them. Cobalt Strike, of course, no. Because of the licensing restrictions, we could not have it. I mean, not a big fan of any sort of frameworks in any case. So it's not there. All right, so now we may like to start the session. For the very last time, let me write on the Zoom chat that we need to ask questions on the Discord channel. And let me put out the invite there once again. Another question is, will the exam be proctored? No, it's not. It's not proctored. All right. So now let me start the session officially. So I got a couple of more questions. Let me answer them. Just let me pick these two. Okay, that was a comment. You're fine, Tipsy. You're absolutely fine. No need to be. I mean, there is always a very good mix of experienced, absolutely new, and somewhere in between students. So it's absolutely fine. You will be fine. Another question is about exam. Can we use only native tools in exam? You are free to use whatever you want during the exam. All right. And now let's start with the session. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Attacking and Defending Active Directory, the Beginners Edition Bootcamp. I'm your instructor, Nikhil Mittal. So something about me, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Nikhil_MITT on Twitter. I'm the author of Red Team Labs on Pentester Academy. I used to actively blog on labofopenetrationtester.com. You can find me on GitHub as Samrat Ashok. I'm the creator of a few open source tools like Nishang, Deploy Deception, Race Toolkit, etc. that help both red and blue teams in performing their jobs better. I'm interested in offensive information security of Active Directory, on-prem Active Directory, Azure, and other Windows technologies. I've previously spoken multiple times at DEF CON main stage, DEF CON villages, different versions of Black Hat. I regularly speak and train at BrewCon, and more. I first spoke, I believe, at Black Hat in 2010. And I think I spoke at the last in-person version of DEF CON. I mean, when it was not hybrid, but it was in 2019. Don't you know? We lose track of time. Right? Time has been frozen since March 2020. What is it, 21? Yes, the COVID years. Right? So I'm seriously, I lose track of years now. So what are we going to discuss in week 1, that is today's session? So these 4 slides is the first one. The 4 slides list the course content. I'm going to just go through the first one. So we will see in this session, we'll start with a very, very quick look at what Active Directory is. I'll briefly touch PowerShell tradecraft. I believe offensive C# as well, and its tradecraft. After discussing all of that, we'll see with this, we'll discuss our methodology, the various steps that go into our kill chain. Once all of that is wrapped up and I introduce you to our target environment, we'll jump into the labs and start enumerating stuff. We'll see how we can extract information like users, groups, group memberships, ACLs, group policies, etc. And we'll use them to map attack paths. We'll also see local privilege escalation techniques on Windows machines, not in much depth because the focus of the class is Active Directory, but we'll discuss them enough to carry forward with the class. We'll also see how we can hunt for local admin privileges on other machines in the domain using multiple methods. And if the time permits, we will go for the very last one as well. That is, we'll see how we can abuse enterprise application to execute some complex attack paths that involve bypassing AV, not EDR, and pivoting to different machines. And then later on, you can take a look at contents of week 2, 3, and 4. No need to go through them right now. So how is the class structured? What is our goal? How is it structured? So this bootcamp is beginner friendly and it assumes absolutely no previous experience with Active Directory security. However, you're expected to understand basics of Active Directory, like how do you log on to a domain join machine? What is a domain? You must know that, okay, there is something called a domain controller that handles everything in Active Directory. Nothing more than that is required. So the way the class is structured is I will introduce a concept, let's say ACLs, and then I'll demonstrate how an attack can be executed by abusing ACLs. And then there is a learning objective section where you can practice on the lab. Once again, please absolutely keep in mind that I do not recommend or expect that you try the learning objectives with me during the session. Unless you've already done the lab twice, you would not be able to keep up and would simply end up losing on some interesting information. So focus on discussions, asking questions. You can always take a look at lab manual walkthrough videos and you can ask questions on Discord from me to understand the commands, etc. So focus more on concepts. Now in the lab, like a real world red team operation, I like to use built-in tools as long as possible. And more than that, a lot of focus is on functionality abuse. So we are not going to use any exploits and exploitation framework. The patch cycle of the lab, I believe, is October 2021. So some of the publicly available exploits will work in the lab. Please feel free to try them. Treat this as a playground, right? More on that later. But in the course, there is no exploit or exploitation framework. Feel free to try anything new though. Please note that we start from a foothold box as a normal domain user. Assume breach. And everything is not in the slides, so stay awake. Even those of you who are joining from the Pacific region and have already and have started at 1 a.m. or 12:30 in the night. And no, those of you who have actually joined that late, thanks a lot for trusting in me that that the course is worthy enough. But I will, of course, share recording with you. So if you want, you can go ahead and take some rest. All right. Now, before we jump into the labs or anything else, a word of caution. Please take a note of what is in scope. All the machines only from 172.16.1.0 to 172.16.70.0/24 are in scope. Everything else is not in scope. If you think that you need to ask that whether something is in scope or not, then probably it is not in scope, right? Please do not attack out of scope machines, including your fellow students' machines. Please note that we would have, or all of you would have, domain admin privileges right at the beginning of session 2. And if you jump ahead in the lab manual, you can have it right away. So if you want, you can at least temporarily disrupt the lab. Not for everyone, but the small section of students who are sharing the lab with you. So please don't do that. Have fun, but let others have fun as well. We do not allow internet access from any of the lab machine. So no need to try that. Finally, please treat the lab network as a dangerous environment and take care of yourself. When I say that, that simply means that do not copy anything on the lab VMs, any of the VMs, including your student VM, that you would not like others to see. As I said, because all of you would have domain admin privileges, everyone can access your student VM that share lab with you. Right. So what is the philosophy of the course? We will emulate an adversary who has a foothold machine in the target domain. Once again, we will not use any exploit in the class, but will depend on abuse of functionality and abuse of features that are rarely patched. No, we'll focus on built-in tools. No need to use Kali. If you want, you can, but I will not show you anything using Kali or any Linux-based tools. Right. Once again, those of you who are right now trying to connect to the lab, you can wait for the session to be over. There is absolutely no need to try the hands-ons with me. Right. So let's take a quick look at Active Directory, what it is. It is directory service, of course, used to manage Windows networks. So everything is an object in Active Directory. Like a user is an object, a computer is an object, and so on. So Active Directory stores information about objects on the network and makes it easily available to users and admins. If I quote from Microsoft's documentation, Active Directory enables centralized, secure management of an entire network which might span a building, a city, or multiple locations throughout the world. This is something Active Directory looks like. So there would be different types of objects. Let's say user objects, machine objects, and other stuff. There could be other directories, email servers, applications. Now, Active Directory provides centralized manageability, security, and interoperability for all of these different types of objects. And these objects could be anywhere in the network. I mean, physically, they could be anywhere. Now, of few components that you may that we would keep coming back to, one is schema. A schema defines objects and their attributes. For example, what would be the attributes of a user object? It could be first name, last name, telephone, office address, etc. What would be the attributes or properties for a computer object? IP address, OS version, organizational unit, etc. These would be attributes for a computer object. Now, this is what is defined in schema. It defines objects and their attributes. Now, by definition, by Microsoft's own definition that we saw on this slide, an Active Directory network may span across the globe. Right? Now, because the network may span across globe or cities or whatsoever, there must be a query and index mechanism. So there is one that provides searching and publication of objects and their properties. Now, where is this information stored? In global catalogs or GCs. Every domain controller in a forest in an Active Directory forest contains information about every other object in the directory. So if let's say there are 7 domain controllers in a forest, then all of them would have a copy of the global catalog. Now, because there are multiple machines, there needs to be a replication service that distributes information across domain controllers. All right. Now, first and foremost, a very important thing to keep in mind is whenever you hear the word Active Directory, think of it as a forest and not as a domain. Please always keep that in mind. That is, when you say, okay, let's talk about Active Directory security, immediately switch to a forest, not a domain. That is, even a single domain Active Directory environment is actually a forest with just one domain, that is the forest root domain. Why I'm saying this is because only a forest is considered to be a security boundary. So this is what the basic structure as far as the administration of Active Directory at very high level administration of Active Directory is concerned. There is a forest, and a forest may contain multiple domains, and domains would contain multiple OUs, organizational units. It is these organizational units that are managed using group policy. Now, Microsoft considers only a forest to be a security boundary. What does that mean? That means that if your domain 1 is compromised, an attacker can go and access everything as enterprise admin or a domain admin or domain 2 as well. And there is no way, nothing you can do to stop that. It is working as intended. And that is why only forest is considered to be a security boundary. Domain boundary or domain trust is not considered to be a security boundary. So it always pays. If you think of Active Directory as a forest, think of it in terms of a forest, not in terms of domain. Right? Now, how do we attack Active Directory? Once again, I keep saying this so that it is very well understood. We are going to abuse AD components and trust and will not rely on patchable exploits. Please always remember, it is the bugs and vulnerabilities that are patched. Features are rarely patched. Right? So what are the platforms or what are the tools that we are going to use? One, of course, PowerShell. So what is PowerShell? It comes baked in by default in every Windows version post Windows Vista and Server 2008. Provides access to almost everything in the Windows platform and Active Directory environment. And that is why it is very useful for attackers. There are multiple ways of running PowerShell scripts completely from memory, and that is what made PowerShell popular with attackers. PowerShell is based on .NET framework and it is tightly integrated with Windows. So when you hear the word PowerShell, think of it as system.management.automation DLL. Do not think of it as this PowerShell.exe. This is just one of the various hosts on a Windows machine that you can use to run PowerShell. So there was a question right at the beginning of, before the session officially began, that my organization blocks PowerShell. Can you suggest some alternatives? Now, it depends a lot on how an organization is blocking PowerShell. First off, I do not absolutely recommend blocking PowerShell as a security measure, but that is some discussion that I'll save for later. So PowerShell is system.management.automation DLL. It is a DLL. It is not this PowerShell.exe. There are many hosts. For example, PowerShell.exe is one such host. And another very simple one is PowerShell ICE, the integrated scripting environment that can also host, that can also be used to run PowerShell commands and scripts. From now on, whenever I use the word PowerShell, it would be Windows PowerShell. So Microsoft now calls PowerShell Core as PowerShell, that is based on .NET Core and it's platform independent. But what we are going to use is Windows PowerShell that is available by default on Windows, right? Now, okay, so it's a repetition. So this is what PowerShell is, right? Now, a very quick refresher or use of PowerShell, that is for the course. You can load a PowerShell script using this. This is called dot sourcing, dot space and the path of the script. Or you can use import module to load a module or a script, import module and the path to the script or the module. Right? Once you import a module, you can list all the commands from the module using get command, dash module, and the module name. Now, a PowerShell module could be of extension PSD1, PSM1, etc. Right? So PS1 is ideally extension of a PowerShell script. PSD1, PSM1 are extension for PowerShell modules. Now, what made PowerShell popular with attackers in about 10 years ago? This was the very first thing that made PowerShell popular, and it is still very widely used. So what are we doing here? In PowerShell version 2, there was that came with Windows 7. There was absolutely no built-in commandlet to interact with web services or websites. So what you could do in place of that is using the net.webclient.net class, we instantiate that class, use the download string method from that class, and download a PowerShell script in memory as a string, and then pass it on to invoke expression to execute it in memory. And that is what is called a download execute cradle. That is, it downloads a script in memory and executes it for you without ever touching this. In fact, this was abused so much that Microsoft came up with AMSI, anti-malware scan interface, to deal with stuff like this. Now, that's not the only download execute cradle. There are more, like this one that uses COM object of IE. PowerShell version 3 onwards, you can use invoke web request with use basic parsing here. Right, and so on. So that is what made PowerShell very popular with attackers. How can you interact with Active Directory using PowerShell? Using XC type accelerator, .NET classes, native executables, calling WMI using PowerShell, using Microsoft's own Active Directory module, and so on. However, with Windows PowerShell 5, Microsoft introduced some enhanced logging with PowerShell, like system-wide transcription, script block logging. We'll come to the rest of the two in a moment. Now, what are these two? What is system-wide transcription? So let me see if it is enabled on my student VM. Not on my VM. Okay, so what system-wide transcripts are? If it is enabled, you can turn it on using group policy. If system-wide transcripts are enabled, all the commands and their outputs that you run in PowerShell are logged to flat files on the local machine. All right, that is what system-wide transcription is. That is, let's say if you simply open up a PowerShell session and run ls, you will see that ls will be logged along with the output of that command in a flat file on the host machine. That is what system-wide transcription is. That is, regardless of what host you use to start PowerShell, let it be PowerShell.exe or MS Build or install util or any of your latest lol binary, latest living of the line binary, anything you use to run PowerShell commands will be logged. And that was actually a game changer, and it still is. If your target organization is using system-wide transcriptions, be absolutely very careful while using PowerShell, right? Then comes script block logging. So what is script block logging? Script block logging is, there are two types of it, warning level and verbose. Warning level is something that is enabled by default, Windows 8.1 onwards. It's based on a list of known bad keywords like new object, get field, etc. There is a well-known list. You can look that up in PowerShell course source code. Based on a list of known bad keywords, whatever run on PowerShell will be logged. And in script block logging, it is not logged in a flat file, but in PowerShell operational log. So it is easier for someone to pull that up, let's say using binlog beats, and it to sync device and create alerts on that. All right. So these two are enhanced logging. This one is a bit harder to bypass. This is easier, completely easier, right? You see the lag of my video. Let me know if it's better now. So just turn off my video to. Okay. Now, the next one is anti-malware scan interface. So script block logging is of two types: warning level and verbose. Now, warning level is what is enabled by default based on known bad keywords. Whatever the command you run on PowerShell, if it contains any of the known bad keyword, it is logged in the PowerShell operational logs. All right. And if verbose is turned on, almost everything that you run in PowerShell will be logged. Unlike system-wide transcription, which is logged in a flat file, this is logged in a flat file. Script block logging logs are created in the PowerShell operational log. So it is easier to analyze them, forward them to a SIEM device or centralized location and analyze. Then comes AMSI or anti-malware scan interface. What's that? So recall we discussed here that things like this are what made PowerShell very popular. Built-in ways of executing scripts entirely in memory. So MZ tries to address that. What MZ does is, before a PowerShell script, let's call this an evil PS. Now, when this evil PS is submitted for execution, MZ steps in, and the only thing that MZ does is it passes this on to the registered AV. All right. That is the MZ provides visibility to the registered AV that, okay, this is a script that is about to execute. You got a signature for that. Is there any static detection that you have for this script? Now, if the AV has a signature for the script, then there would be a detection. That's what MZ does. That's what the purpose of having MZ is. All major antivirus supports MZ. However, usually it is, at least in case of when Windows Defender is used as the AV, it is pretty trivial to avoid or bypass MZ, right? Then comes the constraint language mode or CLM. Now, this is something that we will face with one of our target machines as well. If app locker or WDAC, that is device guard, is configured on a machine, and if there is any condition on execution of PowerShell scripts, even if it is an allow condition, Windows PowerShell relegates to a constraint language mode. Now, in a constraint language mode, you cannot do anything interesting like any of the tools that we are going to discuss in the class other than Microsoft's own tools absolutely do not work in a constraint language mode, right? So that's what PowerShell detections are. What is not a PowerShell detection or a security control is the execution policy. So execution policy is not a security measure. It is present to prevent user from accidentally executing scripts. At least that is what Microsoft's stand has been now for the last few years. Prior to that, it was not so clear, but now it is. And there are several ways to avoid or bypass it. I mean, I should not even say bypass. Without having any admin privileges, you can start a PowerShell process like this. Or you can simply run a command in place of a script because execution policy is there for scripts, not for commands. Or you can pass an encoded command, or you can use this, or a lot more ways. All right, constraint language mode is something that we'll touch again. So if you say it's fine, we'll touch it again when we face it in the lab. All right. Now I get this a lot, that offensive PowerShell is dead. If you use PowerShell, you will be caught, etc. I would say that, I mean, of course, offensive PowerShell is not dead. The detections of PowerShell attacks depend a lot on your target organization and most on if you're using customized code or publicly available code, right? I always like to say this: any tooling or scripting language is simply not dead because it is not cool anymore, right? Use the scripting or programming language that you can use to modify publicly or customize publicly available code. I have to emphasize this, that offensive PowerShell, and of course PowerShell is absolutely kicking, and even it is the same for offensive PowerShell. Do not make a mistake of not learning PowerShell if you are going to assess or maintain security of Microsoft technologies. Take a look at Azure and you will see how much Microsoft has invested in PowerShell. And when you think of offensive PowerShell, do not think of it only as invoke mimicards, right? Invoke mimicards is not the only thing in offensive PowerShell. For example, if you are used to using PowerShell, you will get on to using the Azure AD module just like that, or the AZ PowerShell module just like that. Both of them, Microsoft's own tools and superbly helpful in compromising an Azure environment, right? However, keep this in mind that if the enhanced logging is enabled in the target organization, you have to be careful, especially if you are facing the better countermeasures. In that case, you must be careful. Right? Now there are bypasses. Let's say there are publicly known bypasses that someone shared mg.fail that generates mg bypasses for you. So you have bypasses, and then you can obfuscate those bypasses if your bypass starts getting detected. However, whenever I start discussing AVs and bypasses and EDRs, please remember that the focus of the class is Active Directory, not bypassing AVs or EDRs. Because I get questions like this all the time. How do I bypass carbon black? I don't know, is my answer. And the simple reason for that is I do not want to share anything that has absolutely no shelf life. If I share with you, of course, I can develop that. Many of you can develop that and do that. A bypass for, let's say, carbon black or anything. I mean, I'm taking just that just as an example. Now, if I share that with you in a public class, I mean, in a class like this, the maximum shelf life of that would be what, 1 week, couple of weeks, probably, right? So that's the reason. Let's stay away from discussing EDR bypasses. However, no matter how much I shy away from that, there is at least a basic level of bypasses that I have to discuss. So what our base level is simple plain Windows Defender. But that comes a bit later. So what do we use to bypass the enhanced logging in PowerShell? We are going to use InvisiShell, an open source tool for that. Now, how InvisiShell bypasses of the security controls or enhanced logging is it hooks two .NET assemblies: System Management Automation and System.core. Now, these two DLLs are hooked using a CLR Profiler API. Now, what is a CLR Profiler API? If I pick it up from Microsoft's documentation, a common language runtime profiler, CLR profiler, is a DLL that consists of functions that receive messages from and send messages to CLR by using the profiling API. The profiler DLL is loaded by the CLR at the runtime. That's what it does. As soon as you start PowerShell.exe using InvisiShell and the call to these two DLLs are made, both of them are hooked and the logging functions are incapacitated. Hooked means, what does hook means? I would say, think of it simply as interception, right? To incapacitate, make the functions ineffective. How do you use InvisiShell? If you have admin privileges, you can run this batch file from InvisiShell. If you do not have admin privileges, you can run this. So when you run any of these batch files, it creates some registry keys and starts PowerShell.exe file. And then when we type exit from that session, it performs some cleanup. Now, as I was saying, we cannot shy away from discussing at least some of AV bypasses. Even, in fact, even for the InvisiShell directory or folder that you have on your student VM that contains a modified version of InvisiShell so that Windows Defender does not flag it. Now, we can always load scripts in memory and avoid detection using MG bypass. But how do we bypass signature-based detection of on-disk PowerShell scripts if we talk about Windows Defender? So there are multiple ways of doing that. One of the ways is to use MZ trigger. What MZ trigger does is it can identify the exact part of a script that is detected by Windows Defender. So for example, using MZ trigger 64.exe, if we run it against invoke PowerShell TCP detected. So what is this invoke PowerShell TCP? This is a reverse shell that I wrote a few years back. And it has been used by everyone from, of course, pen testers, red teamers to APTs and whatnot. So it is pretty easily detected. So if you, I mean, this is what you get in the, this is what stock invoke PowerShell TCP.ps1 from Nishan that you get. If you pass it to MZ trigger, it will show you what are the exact strings that are detected. All right. Now, for some of the scripts, I mean, one of the ways to bypass for smaller scripts specifically is obfuscation. So you can take a look at invoke obfuscation, a bit dated, but amazing tool for obfuscating scripts or partial strings. So that is something that you can use as well. For example, the MZ bypass that we use in the class, I think just once though, this MZ bypass that you can find in the lab manual as well. Okay. This one, it is an obfuscated version of a publicly known MZ bypass. Obfuscated using invoke obfuscation. All right. I know, not running music. I was listening to it before the session started. I listen to Bollywood music a lot, but not doing it right now. If you want, I can run some music from some Bollywood music from 60s for you. So a question is, obfuscation means turning the malicious script into a non-malicious for the MZ. Yes, so obfuscation means that if there is a detection, so a very good example of obfuscation is something like just this part. From all of our bypass, from the full bypass, just take a look at the very first string. If I can just center that on my screen. So this is obfuscation of set item. Now, if you think that set item is marked as malicious for some reason, then you obfuscate it. That is, you introduce a backtick, let's say here, make it camel case, get a backtick here. So using this is what obfuscation is. That is, if there is a signature-based detection for set item, this would still be evaluated as set item by PowerShell, but a signature-based detection will miss this. That is what obfuscation is. Right. Now, that's one way. Now, how do you avoid signature-based detection? It's pretty simple to bypass, to bypass signature-based detection. There's just 4 steps. That's very methodological. Scan a script using MZ trigger, modify the detected code snippet, rescan using MZ trigger, and keep doing that as long as you do not get a result like this, MZ result not detected or blank. So, for example, if you pass this, if we scan a script, for example, power up, So PowerUp is a script in PowerShell that can be used to check for privilege escalation on a local machine. So if you scan that using MZ trigger, what it complains about is this system.app domain. So what we can very simply do is we sort of obfuscate it. You reverse it and use it. And then when we check it with MZ trigger, it won't be detected. Right? For the reverse shell in Nishant, what MZ trigger points out is this. So what we can do once again, try and simply reverse net.sockets. And once again, it works. So do you always just reverse the string? No, that's the easiest way. I mean, you can, if you check out, let's say, invoke obfuscation, there are other ways as well. That's just an easy way. And easier to explain as well. That's why I'm using that as an example. Now, if we look at the gold standard of bypasses, AV bypasses, it's specifically Windows Defender, then if we can avoid detection of invoke mimickers on disk, that is something that would be really interesting. Invoke mimickers is without doubt the most heavily signatured PowerShell script. Right? If your AV or EDR does not detect invoke mimickers, then it is time to switch to some other vendor. And I don't think there is anything that claims to be an AV and does not detect invoke mimickers. So if we pass it to MZ trigger and we have to rename it, right? When I was testing this, I could not actually check it with invoke mimickers. I have to rename it. To be honest, haven't gone into details why I was not able to do that, but I just rename it to mimi.ps1. And then it resulted in multiple detections, multiple strings, including the name and Twitter handle of Joseph, who now works for Microsoft, interestingly, for many years now, actually. So what we can do is remove the comments, modify each use of dump creds. Dump creds is the parameter name in invoke mimickers. Modify the variable names of the Win32 API calls that are detected, and reverse the strings or make changes to the strings. And also the mimickers compressed DLL. So invoke mimickers contains the complete mimickers DLL in a compressed format. So we need to make changes to that as well. How? Using this, we make changes to dump creds. We change the parameter set name to DC or whatsoever you want everywhere. Right? We need to modify the variable names of the Win32 API calls that are detected. What are the calls that are detected? Virtual protect, write process memory, create remote thread. So we made changes to the names of those variables. Finally, reverse the strings or make whatever changes you want to the strings that are detected, and also to the mimickers DLL, the compressed DLL. Please note that because of these changes, when you run the invoke mimickers on the lab VM, it takes some additional time, 30 minutes to a minute, additional time to execute. This is the way we can bypass at least signature-based detection of Windows Defender, even when we run scripts from disk. All right. Now, what is the methodology that we are going to use to compromise or attack the target environment or lab environment? It is the assume breach methodology. So assume breach that is not a reactive methodology, it is a proactive methodology. That is, in place of the traditional perimeter-based security where you dig trenches, you have a perimeter-based security and you're locked and loaded for the adversary to come in. In place of that, here you assume that the adversary has already breached the target environment, right? So to sum it up, it is more likely that an organization has already been compromised, but just has not discovered it yet. So it contains 6 steps. We would be focusing on red teaming, insider attack simulation, and blue team. So a question is, are we going to see blue team tactics? Not a lot of them, to be honest, but I will keep discussing on the pitfalls for attackers when using some of the methods. So pitfalls for attackers are opportunities for blue teams. And we will have a dedicated discussion as well, but not much detail. Right? So what is the kill chain? When I say kill chain, imagine me making air quotes. So kill chain that we are going to use is this. We'll start with recon. In fact, in the class, we are going to assume that we have done the recon part. That is basic port scanning, etc. That is something that we've already done. So we'll start actually with domain enumeration. We'll go for local privilege escalation, and then we'll hunt for admin privileges on other machines. Once we have, let's say, some local admin privileges on our foothold and other machines, we'll start with lateral movement, then we'll go to domain admin privilege escalation, cross-trust attacks, and finally persistence and exfiltration. That is what we are going to do. The lab environment is a fictional financial services company called MoneyCorp. Now, MoneyCorp has fully patched Server 2016 machine with Windows Defender turned on. The patch level for MoneyCorp is, I believe, October 2021. Same goes for the Defender signature state. It has Server 2016 forest functional level. Please note that Server 2016 was the last forest functional level. It is the latest. There is nothing after Server 2016 forest functional level. There are multiple forests and multiple domains. Because of up-to-date patching and the latest functional level, whatever you learn in this class would hold true for many years down the line, 5, 7, 10 years at least. Unless Microsoft literally changes how Active Directory works, and they would not, because they have not been trying to, they have not even tried this since, what, last 2 decades? So that would be very useful. All right. Also, please keep this in mind that we have minimal firewall usage. We want to focus more on AD concepts than, let's say, pivoting through the network. There are pivoting challenges as well, but nothing a lot of network-ish. All right. Now, a very good point that Seth raised. Microsoft has borderline abundant AD feature updates. Absolutely. Absolutely. Not only that, if you look at the response from Microsoft when it comes to security issues in on-prem AD and compare that to Azure AD, the contrast is very visible. I mean, it doesn't need to be the smartest bulb to figure that out, right? However, in my opinion, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am in this case. Microsoft abandoning security of on-prem AD would only result in an increase of demand of on-prem AD security professionals. And I'm not saying this because I'm teaching this course. I've seen that, right? This is, I mean, 2022 is not the year when Microsoft began that. That was pretty visible for past few years. Anyone who closely works with Microsoft technologies and especially their marketers. I mean, I fortunately do not work closely with their marketers, but my clients do. They have been selling Azure at the expense of on-prem AD for a few years now. So what Microsoft initially thought was they would be able to push all of their or most of their on-prem clients to Azure. But I can tell you that if not failed miserably, that has not been as successful as they wanted. And thanks to hybrid identity in Azure, knowingly or not unknowingly, I mean, I was about to say knowingly or unknowingly, Microsoft made on-prem security a part of Azure. But I would say Microsoft's hand was forced to make on-prem identity a part of Azure. Thanks to hybrid identity, if your on-prem environment security is not good, regardless of how carefully you design or plan your Azure tenant, your security is still going to suck a lot, right? And that is why, even though there seems to be no major changes or improvements to on-prem security, which is true, its importance is no less, absolutely no less, right? Now, how do you access the lab environment? You log on to adlab.enterprisesecurity.io using the Google account that you registered with us. If you registered using a non-Google account, then the lab team would have reached out to you to provide them a Google account. So once you log on to the lab platform, this is what you see. Your subscription start time is your lab start time. Subscription end time is when your lab access ends. So all of you get, I think, 31 or 32 days of lab access. So there may be a day or two difference between some of you. Some of you got access, I believe, the day before yesterday. Some of you got it yesterday. Some of you got the access today. Right. This lists the last date to attempt exam, the CRTP exam for you. Now, if you want to use the web method, that is guacamole, to access the lab, you simply copy this URL and use the username and password to access it. So that's one of the ways. Or if you want to use VPN like I do, these are the VPN credentials. Use the OpenVPN client to use this VPN config file, provide these credentials. Once you are connected to the VPN, then you can access your VM. You can RDP to it using the credentials listed here. That's how you access the lab environment. Make sure that you spend some time to look at the warnings and informations that we have here in the lab portal. All right, you can check out frequently asked questions. I mean, no one really reads these, but it always helps, right? It brings some mental peace if we have frequently asked questions here. No one really reads that though, right? But yeah, it's there if you want. In the lab options, if you click on certification exam, you get the exam attempt expiration date here as well. And you have the ability to choose an exam location out of 4 server locations: US, Europe, Southeast Asia, and Pacific. Now, the lab environment, the practice lab or the challenge lab that we would be solving or doing throughout the 4 sessions, that is shared, but not across all hundreds of you. That is shared for, I think, just 10 or 12 of you, or 10 or 15 of you. I mean, pretty reasonable. So our lab environments, we have tested for more than 300 concurrent users. But of course, we do not use that. I mean, not worth it to crowd a lab instance with that many users. Right? So we just keep a handful of users in a lab instance. But in case of the exam lab, it is an absolutely dedicated lab for you. Currently, the CRTP exam is a 24 hours hands-on exam. You choose a server location, click on, excuse me, click on setup exam button that shows up here. It takes 15 to 20 minutes to set up your dedicated exam environment. And then you can access a student VM in the target environment. Try to compromise all the machines. There are multiple exam instances. All of them have 5 machines. So you need to compromise all the 5 machines, not including your student VM. Write a simple walkthrough report. Share that with the lab team within 48 hours of your exam expiry. And that is all that you need to do to clear the exam. All right. Even if you do not want yet another certification, I would still suggest you to try this. Would be a fantastic, interesting challenge. Is there a sample report? No, we do not share one. But you can think of the lab manual that you get in the course materials. Think of it as, I mean, not as detailed as it is, but you can use that as a template. That is, explain that what you are going to do in a couple of sentences, the command, what would the command do, and a screenshot as an example. Right? Now, one exam tip that I can give you right away is, please do not try to set up the Bloodhound GUI on the student VM in exam. We have had many users who would try to do that and would face issues. Why? Because to be able to run the Bloodhound application, you would need a JRE instance, you would need Neo4j Graph database. So that would be unnecessarily wasting time on during the exam. So make sure that you have, if you plan to use Bloodhound in the exam, make sure that you have the GUI set up on your host VM and just run the ingesters on the exam VM. If you've never heard about Bloodhound, that is absolutely fine. We'll briefly take a look at it later on. All right. Then there is a flag verification as well. If I've not verified all the flags, I've not. So if you verify all the flags, 40 of them, then we will send you a course completion certificate once the session is over. This certificate would be different from the CRTP certifications. All right. And finally, you can click on this access lab material link here to access the slides, slide notes, lab manual to challenge the lab using Covenant, the simple lab manual, all the tools that we use in the lab, diagrams, and walkthrough videos. All right. So that is how you can access the lab environment. A question is, can the use of PowerShell be enough in the exam? Yep, that's enough. That is enough. Right. So this is what the lab environment looks like. So we land on these student VMs within a domain called $corp.moneycorp.local. Now this domain contains multiple target servers. There is a forest, of course, moneycorp.local. There is a child domain, us.$corp.moneycorp.local. There is a trust relationship with eurocorp.local and eu.eurocorp.local. Right. So that is what our lab environment is. Now let's start with our first phase of attack. The domain enumeration part. So what is it that we can use for domain enumeration? A question is, will you share exam network diagram like this lab diagram? Nope. That is something that I expect you to be able to draw. I mean, I'm not asking to draw the diagram, but you have to envision that after enumeration that, okay, this is what the target environment in exam looks like. So what we have in the lab environment here is all of us land here on the student VM. I mean, our own student VMs. These VMs are joined to $cop.moneycop.local. Now there are multiple target servers in this domain. This domain has a parent domain that is forest root called moneycop.local and a child domain. And then there is a trust relationship with a forest, with another forest called eurocop.local. Eurocop.local has a child domain as well. Is it possible to not need the full 24 hours for the exam? Absolutely. Depends a lot on your existing skills and how much you practice in the practice lab. So I have had students who have been able to complete the exam in 8 hours, 10 hours. There have been a lot of users who would not complete that in 24 hours. So it's always a mix, as you would expect. All right. Let's jump into domain enumeration. Once you have, as we discussed, we start with an assume breach mentality. That is, we have a foothold. Now, from that foothold, as a normal domain user, what can we use for enumeration? We can use Microsoft's own Active Directory PowerShell module. So this is the ADDS RSET, the Domain Services Administration tool, that is signed by Microsoft and works even in the constraint language mode. I maintain a mirror of that module here. And of course, there is absolutely no detection for that. This is how you can import the AD module. We can also use Bloodhound that contains C# and PowerShell collectors. We can use PowerView that once again a PowerShell tool. We're not going to use the PowerSploit version, but the one that is a bit updated one. SharpView is something that some people suggest or recommend. I really don't personally use it because it doesn't support filtering using pipeline. But you can use that as well, or any other tool, even AD Explorer, for example. Whatever suits your operational needs, go for it. So let's start with the domain enumeration part. Once again, no need to try this with me. Just take a look how you can do it. Okay, I'll check that. I will check that. So if one of the links is showing a 404, let me check that. Is there a break in this one? Unfortunately not. It's just a small class, just 2.5 hours. right? Unless there is an emergency. So first, what we are going to do is, if you take a look at these slides, there are two fonts here. The darker one, Lucida Console, that is for Power View commands. The lighter one, Courier New, is for the AD module. So what I'm going to do on my student VM, I'm going to start not partial sessions. I'm going to start two processes, two command prompts. In one of them, I will load the AD module, and in another one, I will load Power. So let me first start InvisiShell here, right, with non-admin privileges. So what InvisiShell did was it added some registry keys to start a CLR profiler API, and then it starts a partial session for us. Now, this partial session that we have, this is free of MZ, system-wide transcription, and script block logging, all three. Now we can go ahead and import the AD module. Please always keep in mind, as in the slides, you have to import both the DLN and the PSD1. Otherwise, not all the attributes would be listed. So this is here we loaded the AD module. And let me run, whoops, another InvisiShell. Why are we using InvisiShell here? So that any logging, because we are in the target environment, we are on a foothold in the target environment, any logging should not lead to detection. Once the partial session starts up, let's load Power View. Now we can start with some basic enumeration. For example, let's get some information about the target domain. Let me pick some questions from Discord. For InvisiShell, would this get affected by AD sync and GPU application? I don't think so. I don't think that it is affected by that. What does that batch file do? It makes some entries into the registry so that whenever you start PowerShell session, it can hook up a couple of DLLs that we discussed earlier to bypass detection. If we use InvisiShell, will the logs not be created? Yes, they will not be created. Is there a significant difference between dot sourcing and import module? No, yes, there is. You cannot dot source a module. It will result in an error. You have to import a module. So if you have to learn just one of the commands, then go for import module. Another question is, is this same as the above? No, the space is required. If you are using dot sourcing, then you do need a space here. All right. Now, when we run get domain here, we are a part of a forest called moneycop.local. It seems to have just two domains other than the forest root. We'll come to that in a moment. Our current domain is $cop.moneycop.local. What else? There seems to be just one domain controller, dcop dc. There seems to be, there is a child domain for our current domain. Right. Similarly here, for the AD module, if we request the same information, of course we get the same result. We are part of a domain called $cop.moneycop.local in the forest moneycop that we can of course guess or know by the naming convention. The domain functional level is server 2060. This is the domain SID, the security identifier, the globally unique identifier of the domain. Correct. Now, if we have trust relationship with other domain, you can specify the domain parameter as well in case of Power View and or the identity parameter in case of the AD module. So trust is something that we discuss at the end of today's session. So right now you can simply assume that we would be able to request the same information from moneycop.local. The information that we get or we can request from our current domain, that we can also request from the forest group. Right? What else? We can take a look at the policy for the current domain. That is very important. Why? So let's take a look at this. When you run get domain policy data from Power View, we get some policies for the current domain. Look at the system access policy. That's the password policy. So if you plan to run brute force attacks or password spraying attacks in the target domain, although I absolutely do not encourage that, that is very noisy. But if you plan to run them, then it makes sense that you take a look at this before running it. A more important one is this. Now, what's that? This is the maximum lifetime for the TGT, 10 hours, maximum renewal age, 7 days, I believe. Maximum life for a TGS or a service ticket, once again, 10 hours. Clock skew is, this is in minutes. So if there is a time or clock difference between DC and any of the member machines, then there would be trust issue. Now, why is this useful? Let's say you compromise the target environment. You get the Kobe TGT hash, and now you want to forge a golden ticket. By default, Mimicards or any of its variants, by default, they create a TGT that has a lifetime of 10 years. Now, please always make sure that you comply to the ticket age and renewal time in the target environment to avoid detection. There are detection mechanisms that specifically look for if there is a TGT that does not comply with the Kerberos policy in the environment. So the idea of avoiding any detection is to gel in, to mix well with the existing stuff, not to create an anomaly is the goal. All right. So when I say that we are not going to discuss a lot of bypasses, that is for endpoint. When it comes to detection or OPSEC of AD related attacks, then we are going to absolute be on our toes. We are going to take it head on and try and check if we are not detected by absolutely anything at all. All right. Now there are domain controllers, of course. So you can take a look at the domain controllers as well. So if I run get domain controller, what do we have here? The domain controller is, there is just one. It's called DCOP DC. That is for our current domain. It is a server 2016 standard machine. That's the IP address, contains only the default site. All right. Necox, please look at my screen. That is what you need to do. All right. Okay. So my team mentioned someone needs an invite. Let me share an invite once again, a Discord invite on Zoom chat. Okay, what else? We can, once we have some basic information about the target domain. Let's get some information about the users. So if I run get domain user, because there seems to be some confusion, let me tell this to you once again. We are currently using two tools, PowerView and Active Directory module. The commands that are in darker font are from PowerView. The one in lighter font are from the AD module. All right. So let's list users once we have some basic information. Let's list users. Seems to be many users. And this is where having the ability to know a bit of PowerShell comes handy. For example, we can simply just list them based on SAM account name. So these all are the users in the current lab instance, the one that I am on. How many users? Just 98 users, a tiny environment. Definitely a lab environment. All right. We can, of course, get details about a specific user as well using the identity parameter. Now, another interesting thing to enumerate for users is this, listing all the properties. Now, why is this important? Why is this important to list properties? Let's take a look at this. In place of all the properties, so what we did here, we listed all the properties for a specific user. Here we are looking at just same account name and logon count for all the users. Why is this important? For two reasons. One is, think of a scenario, you start a penetration test or a red team assessment, and you immediately find out that, okay, there is a Kerberos table global, sorry, not global admin, my bad, still in Azure mode. There is a Kerberos table domain admin account that you can see. You get the account's password really fast, and poof, you are a domain admin. Hold your horses. If you find out that there is, let's say, a Kerberos table domain admin or credentials of domain admin just lying on your foothold machine, it always makes sense to check at least once. That is, not rushing for the lowest hanging fruit. Check if the account that you're targeting, is that a decoy, is that a deception? Right? Check if the account that you have compromised, if that is a decoy account. The easiest way of doing that is to check their logon count. If you have a domain admin that is very easy to compromise, but the logon count is what, 4, 5, less than 10, then probably it is a decoy. In addition to that, I mean, let's say that the organization that you're targeting does not have enough pockets, deep enough pockets to have a tool, a shiny tool that deploys decoys. Even in that case, always think of this. If you are, let's say, creating a golden ticket, or if you are impersonating a user, always make sure that you are not using a stale account. Always abuse an active account. And this is a very easy way, very good way to find out active users. Right? So that is what it is for. Now, one more reason why would you like to look at user properties is this. So what happens if I run this one? What are we doing here? For all the domain users, we are running an LDAP filter. What is the filter? Where if the user's description field contains the string built, we want to list the user's name and description. Like this. All right. Now, this could be a very quick win, or a decoy as well, but this could be a very quick win. So in place of built, you simply replace this with password, or for example, because this is January 2022, replace this with January, or anything like that. A lot of, and there is actually no need. If you simply list descriptions of all the users, you can see if someone has written a password in description field. A lot of times, organizations leave passwords in description. Teams write passwords in description for service accounts, unfortunately. All right. So that is a quick win without having to touch LSS or anything else at all. A question is there a way to forge a logon count? There could be. I've not tested it yet. Is any of the decoy considerations valid for the exam? No, not really. I mean, there are some, I would say, misdirections in the exam to incapacitate spoilers that people post, but there is no decoy as such. Those of you who are still trying to do the hands-on with me, make sure that you have the lab manual opened up. So that would help. If you really want to try stuff right away, make sure that you open up the lab manual at least. All right, what else do we have? Once we have users, then we can go for computers. Please note that when you run anything like this, let's say, this lists computer objects, not real or virtual computers. What does that mean? By default, any user can create up to 10 computer accounts. So be careful. I mean, it's not, in this case, all of these are not actual virtual machines, but it is not necessary that all of them would be live. So you can use, for example, logon count even for machines to know which of one of them are stale computer accounts and which one of them are active. A question is, a decoy account seems to be something I see recommended over last few years. Is this, so I skipped the name. I usually do not take names other than Microsoft. Love and hate relationship. So is this an effective detection method? I would say, Dan, it is an interesting detection method, if not effective. If you think that the target organization or your organization is done with the basics of security, they have a security posture that is mature enough, then yes, deception could be pretty useful. All right. Now let's talk about groups. Of course, if you run get domain group, we get a list of groups in the domain, pretty similar to net group DOM. However, please keep in mind, net uses SAMR protocol, SAM remote protocol, whereas Power View or the AD module or AD Explorer, these uses LDAP. Right? Now we can list users or groups based on keywords, for example, wildcards. For example, if you want to list the groups that contain the word admin, we can use get domain group * admin. All right. Now, one group is missing from this list. One very interesting group, enterprise admins. Would anyone like to answer that? Why is enterprise admin not showing up here? Yes, exactly. That is in the forest root. So if you specify the domain moneycorp.local here, that is our forest root, then it will show up. Now, once we know some of the groups, let's say if we can list, of course, we can list the membership of the groups. For example, domain admins, that's one group that everyone likes. So there are just two domain admins here, a user called SVC admin and the default domain administrator. I wish that this would be true in production environments as well. Just two domain administrators, come on. I've never ever seen a production environment. I mean, you may have let's say, at least two of them could be the break glass administrators. So you may need to have more. But that's one of the biggest issues that you would have in enterprise environments. Just too many domain admins, right? Because, and I recall this like 6-7 years back in one of my closure meetings of a simple penetration test. My client said with a shrug, like, and everything just works with domain admin, right? Services, domain admin. I mean, that environment was actually unique. Even their delegated OU administrators were given the domain admin privileges. I mean, I'm usually pretty respectful because you never know what a target environment and their IT team is going through. But I literally had to laugh. And what is the need of delegating administration if you are assigning them domain admin privileges in any case? So, I mean, they had no answer, right? To be honest, it is, I mean, I used to smirk a lot at defenders when I was young. I mean, I'm still young, but when I was younger and more naive and new. But then I started maintaining these labs, the ones that we are practicing on. And I immediately developed a respect for people who maintain stuff, unsung heroes, right? So no one comes to you and pats on your back if you stop an attack because no one knows that. So a thankless job maintaining stuff. That is what I got to know once I started maintaining these labs. But yeah, that's what it is. Unfair. So life is unfair. Yeah, that's right. Now, there is sometimes a recommendation that you should rename the default domain administrator. Okay, let me make a statement and then you answer on Discord that whether it is right or wrong, correct or not. If I rename this default domain administrator, no one could find it. Correct or not? Wrong. Absolutely, because the well-known relative identifier or the well-known SID, this is always going to be 500. You cannot change that. All right, so you will still find some hardening guides, the DC domain hardening guides that would still recommend this. Please note that this stands absolutely correct for local administrators. Why? Because you cannot enumerate local users on a non-DC machine if you are not an administrator already there. You need admin privileges to list local users and groups on a non-DC machine. But on a DC, you can enumerate that, so no point in renaming this. I said that renaming the local administrator on a non-DC machine, that is a simple normal member machine, is worth it because you cannot enumerate local groups and users on a non-DC machine without having local privileges, local admin privileges, right? So for example, you can list local groups and users on a DC without having local admin privileges, but for a non-DC machine, you would need local admin. So it makes sense to rename the local administrator on the member machines. The other way around, the enumeration of other way around is true as well. That is, if you want to check what groups a user is a member of. For example, student 1 is a member of 2 groups. There is a group called RDP users, and then there is another group called domain users. Yes, guy with the code, that is correct. This is what I was talking about. If you want to list all the local groups on a machine, you can do that. If you want to get members of all the local groups on a machine, you can do that only on non-DC. Otherwise, you need administrator privileges. For example, if you want to list who all are the members of the administrators group on the domain controller, you can run this command, get net local group member against the DC. So there are three principals that are member of the administrators group: the default domain administrator, the domain admins group, and the enterprise admins group. If you run this against some other machine, you get nothing. Probably an access denied. Right? Yes, Nadeem. To run this against the DC, any domain user can do that. But to run it against any other VM, or sorry, any other machine, you must have local admin privileges there. All right. And then there are some more enumeration things that you can do. Get actively logged on users on a computer needs local admin rights. Locally logged on users on a computer needs remote registry that is started by default on server OS that you can run against the DC. And get the last logged on user on a computer needs admin rights and remote registry, both of them. Finally, we can, although a bit dated, not dated, I would say not as fruitful as they used to be. You can find shares using invoke share finder. You can find files in shares using invoke file finder and get all file servers of the domain. So these, why are we listing file servers separately? Because a lot of users access file servers. It may be possible to trick a user in opening a file or simply get interesting information from a file server. Is it noisy running the share and file finder? Yes, very noisy. A lot more than whatever we have been doing up to now. So I'll touch this later on when we run the commands to find local admin access on other machines. This is very noisy. That is correct. So a very quick learning objective. Once again, no need for you to do that. I will do that for you. Enumerate following for the $COP domain: users, computers, domain admins, that is membership of domain admins, and membership of the enterprise administrators group. Although we have already seen that, let me quickly do that again. So we start a command prompt. A question is, sorry, I just read the question. A question is, are we going to cover enumeration of resultant membership from nested groups? This, I think I forgot to highlight that. Ceph, this actually does that. See that recurse parameter? That would actually show you the resultant membership from nested groups. Okay, coming back to this, let's look at the first task of our learning objective 1. Users. So you start a command prompt. Right, and start in shell so that the tools that we run are not detected, especially the enhanced logging does not catch them. Let's load PowerView using source dot sourcing dot space in the path. Let's load it. Let's list all the users by their SAM account name. All right. Second task is to list all the computers. Let's list them using their DNS hostname. These all are the computers. The third task is to list the membership, excuse me, to list the membership of the domain admins group. two domain administrators, SVC admin and the default domain administrator. Membership of the enterprise admins group. Recall that enterprise admins group is present only in the forest group. So let's query that. And there is just one domain administrator. Sorry, there is just one enterprise administrator. That is the built-in one, the built-in domain admin for bunnycop.local. Does InvisiShell bypass MZ? I believe yes. If it is not doing that for you, then we can use an MZ bypass within MZ. Oh, sorry, within InvisiShell. Now, a quick look at domain enumeration using GPO. It's a group policy. Those of you who are from the sysadmin background would know the importance. The group policy is the de facto management solution or managing method when it comes to Active Directory. It allows configuration of security settings, registry-based settings, logon scripts, etc. from a centralized place, that is DC. And because of that, GPO can be abused for various attacks like privilege escalation, backdoors, persistence, etc. Right now, we are in the enumeration part. So let's see what we can get from the group policy. Now, unfortunately, what we can extract only is what are the group policies, that is list of group policies and where do they apply. What we would not be able to enumerate is the resultant set of policies, that is what exact settings are applied on a remote machine using group policy. That is something that we cannot enumerate. So what we could get is a list of group policies. Let me list them based on display names. So there are five policies in the target environment: default domain policy, default domain controllers policy. As the name suggests, these are default. App locker, servers, and students. Right. We can also use, that's not configured in the, we are not using that in the lab, but we can also list restricted groups using get domain GPO local group. So restricted groups is a setting used to add your domain groups to the local groups on member machines. So a lot of time that gives you a very interesting path. Let's say a user is added, a domain group is added to the local administrators group using restricted group setting. You can enumerate that using this command, and that gives you an attack path. That is, if you get membership of the target domain group, you will get local admin privileges on the target machines. Right? We can also get users who are in a local group of a machine using GPO. We can get machines that are where the given user is member of a specific group. Now, group policies are applied on organizational units, OUs. Someone asked me to repeat about restricted groups. So what restricted groups are used for is, a domain group can be a member of local group. This can be done. There are many methods. One of the methods is to use the restricted groups setting. Now, this command shows you the groups that are added to a local group using the restricted group setting. Now, let's say this local group is the local administrators group. Now, this would be a very fruitful target in this case. All the machines where this policy applies, you would have local admin privileges on that machine if you compromise any user in this group. That is why this is fruitful to enumerate it. Right? But we're not using this in the current lab. Now, where does the group policies apply? Group policies apply on organizational units or OUs. We can run get domain OU to list all the organizational units. So there is one domain controllers, that's a default one. Then there is an organizational unit called applock. There is one called servers, and then there is one called student machines, just for OUs. All right. Now, if you want to know which policies is applied on an OU, we need to read the GPO name from GP-link attribute of getNet OU or getDomain OU. So here, let's say you want to check which group policy applies on the student machines OU. This is the group policy. Right? So get domain GPO. And if I pass the identity, pass this in the identity parameter. So on the student machines OU, students group policy applies. Now, unfortunately, we cannot know what are the settings. Not possible to get the resultant set of policy for a remote machine. Right? On the current machine, you can run rsop.msc to get the resultant set of policies, but not for a remote machine. If you want to visualize, yep, that's the way. If you want to visualize how the group policies look like, I can show you that on the DC. So those of you who are not from a sysadmin background, unfortunately, if I can just get this working. So if you look up on the DC, this is what OUs look like. For example, there is an OU called student machines. There is an OU called servers. There is an OU called applock. So think of OUs as categorizations for easy administration, folders or containers for easy administration. All right. A question is, can we import the GPO module just like we did for the AD module? No. In my experiments, it was not possible. Now, this brings us to learning objective 2. Are there any questions on whatever the... So we had a limited view of group policies actually. But are there any questions on this one? Okay, a question is, why are the student machines and domain controllers OUs separate from the computer's container? Specifically for the domain controllers eraser, because domain controllers have a separate set of policies that apply on them. So it is better to have them in a separate container. For student machines, I created one so that I can once again push a separate set of policies on them. That's the reason, for easy administration, basically. All right. Now let's take a look at our learning objective 2. Enumerate following from the $COP domain. List all the OUs, list all the computers in the student machine OU, list the GPUs, and enumerate GPU applied on the student machines OU. All right. So let's go for the first one. List all the OUs. As we saw earlier as well, we can use get domain OU. Let's list them based only on name. Of course, it is a lab environment, just 4 OUs. All right. The second is list all the computers in the student machine OU. This needs a bit of PowerShell food. So let me first run the command and show you the results, and then I'll explain that to you. List all the computers in the student machine OU. These are the computer objects in the student machine OU. Right? Now, what we did was, we listed the student machines OU, got its distinguished name. Now, for the result from the left side of the pipeline, this stands for each object. This percentage is a shorthand for an alias for each object. Get the list of domain computers, but search only for the current object. That is, search only at this path. Search only in the student machines OU. That is what the search base denotes. So we got all the computers that are under this OU. Now, the third task was to list all the GPUs. We've already seen that. Get domain GPU. Now, to enumerate GPUs applied on the student machines OU, let's first list all the GPUs just for the sake of completion. So this lists all the OUs. Now the GP link of, we need the GP link of student machines OU to find out the group policy that applies on them. Right, we copied the name. And now if I run go get domain GPU, this gives me that the student's policy is applied on the student machines OU. You can use some sort of one-liner. Please note that this is very, very, very length-based, very crude, but you can use this to simply get the group policy, name of the group policy applied on the student machines OU. Once again, just a POC based very much on length. All right. So this concludes our learning objective 2. Let's move on to ACLs now. Now, ACLs are central to the access control model of Active Directory. Think of it this way. So whenever an object or a thread wants to access an object, the thread presents an access token. What does an access token contain? It contains security context of that process, that is identity and privileges of the user. Now the target object has a security descriptor that contains the identifier of the owner and 2 lists: discretionary access control list and system access control list, DACL and SSCL, tackle and SACL. Now, think of it this way. Let's say you check into a hotel and they give you an access card. Now, that access card contains probably your identity, let's say your name, and the privileges. What are your privileges? To access the designated room, and probably what executive lounge or the breakfast area, etc., or the elevator. That is what your privileges are. Now, when you present that access card to, let's say, your room, then the room or the identification system on the door of that room contains a list of the users who are allowed to access. For example, holder of that key card can access that, housekeeping can access that, law enforcement can access that, manager can access it, and so on. So a very, very, very layman example of ACL. You have a token or a card that you present to the resource, and the resource has a list to match if your identity is allowed to access the resource or not. As simple as that. That is, you can access a resource like your own room, but you cannot access someone else's room, hopefully. All right. Now, DACL and SACL are 2 different lists. DACL contains the permissions that a trustee, that is a principal, has on an object, and SACL is for logging success or failure. A quick example could be this. Let's say there are 2 threads, A and B, that want to access an object. The access token of thread A contains identity of a user called Andrew and the 3 groups that the user Andrew is a member of. So this thread presents the access token to the target object. A match is made to the DACL. It is a list. Please keep this in mind. That is, there are multiple entries, and it is a list of entries. So there is first ACE that has an explicit access denied for Andrew. The user or the thread would immediately get an access denied. Deny takes precedence. Please keep that in mind. Now let's take a look at thread B, as the access token has identity of Jane and group A. Now, the DACL, there would be the match is 1 by 1, that is in an order. So there would be match with first ACE, access denied for Andrew, but this thread is not affected. Then there is an access allowed for group A. Does the access token contain identity of group A? Yes. So this thread would get access. All right. Let's take a look at this. On the GUI as well. So let's take a look at the ACL of the domain admins group. So if you go to the security tab here and click on advanced, this list under the permissions tab is the DACL or the DACL. So the DACL has entries or aces that, for example, this one, how do we read this ace? This is an allow ace that system has full control over the domain admins group. That's what this DACL is. And the SACL, and I'm answering your question as well, Rukaro. SACL lists auditing. That is, what is the action that would be logged? So for example, if you want to, let's say, log when everyone, even if everyone enumerates, that is, reads the domain admin group, and you want a 4624 log for that. No, sorry, a 4662 log for that. Then you turn this on. SACL controls logging. That is, if a particular action on that object will be logged or not. That is what SACL contains. DACL contains governs access. All right. We can, of course, list ACLs from the command line using Power View. We can run this, that is based on SAM account name or search base. We can also use the built-in get ACL PowerShell commandlet for that. However, you must import the AD module first, and then you can list ACLs using that too. Right? For example, if I run this, to list the ACL of the domain admins group, this is an individual ace, right? This is a single ace. And all of these aces together make the list, the DACL, the discretionary access control. Now, how do we read this ace? Object DN. Object DN is the field that contains name of the object for which we are reading this ace. So this is how we read this on domain admins. The security identifier S1518 has generic all rights, that is full control. What is S1518? A well-known SID of system. That is, on the domain admins, system has full control. On domain admins, system has full control. That is how we read this. All right. Now answer this. Does this make sense? If I go ahead, let's say we have compromised a domain administrator and we have domain admin privileges. Does this make any sense? I provide full control over the domain admins group to a user that I have access to. Now, what would be the benefit of that? If I provide full control, if I get full control over the domain admins group, I will still not be a member of the domain admins group, but I can add or remove members at will. I can reset passwords of the domain administrators. That is, I do not show up if someone audit the membership list, but I would still have the full control. All right. So is this a viable method? Can I use this? Okay, please give me some more yes, so that I can tell you how wrong you are. Yes, Tobbs, you are right. So please some more yes. Thanks. So this is, in theory, a viable method. However, as Tobbs answered, there is a sanitation mechanism. I would not call it a protection mechanism, a sanitation mechanism in AD called admin security descriptor holder that would remove this. But that is something that we save for discussion later. Right now, to understand the importance of ACLs, let's assume that, okay, this is a valid way. So this is how important ACLs are. Have you ever wondered why domain admins are domain admins? I mean, what gives them power? It is the ACLs that give domain admins the power. Let's say, for example, if you look up at any group, for example, let's take a look at the ACL of the built-in administrators group. Domain admins have almost full control. Look at the domain of object of the domain itself. The domain admins have almost full control. That is what makes domain admins, right? All powerful. Now, you would easily find 10, 20,000 ACEs, not ACLs, ACEs, even in a small enterprise environment. So how do you find out interesting ones? Using tools like Bloodhound, or, I mean, because we have not discussed Bloodhound yet. You can use find interesting domain ACL. So what does this command do? Once again, this is from PowerView. What find interesting domain ACL does is it requests all the ACs from the DC and lists the one where the Active Directory rights are modify or generic all, that is non-read rights, rights where someone can do something. For example, let me stop this. For example, if you see here, there are many users that we have created in the domain for some hands-on. For example, if you read this, on support 458 user, the RDP users group has generic all, full control. And that is why it was interesting for the find interesting domain ACL. All right. Now, this brings us to our learning objective 3, a very small, a very quick learning objective. Enumerate following for the $corp domain, ACL for the domain admins group, and all modify or write ACs for the student X. Let's try this. Let me come back to your answer in a moment. Speed. So we've already seen how we can list ACLs of the domain admins group. I'm not going to run this right now. Now this, the second task where we want to list all the interesting ACLs for student X. If I run this command, it won't show any output. So what are we doing here? From the result of find interesting domain ACL, we are filtering out using where object all the entries where identity reference name matches student 1. However, please keep in mind that even if student 1 does not have any entries directly, it is a member of a couple of groups. So you may like to also check if any of those groups have interesting permissions. So as we saw earlier, yes, student X is a member of RDP users group. What is student X? The student user that we are using. If you are student 458, then student X, read student X as student 458. So here we can see that on control 455 user, RDP users group has generic all. For enumeration like this, Bloodhound is the better option because you would not need to run this again and again. In that case, Bloodhound will show that to you, and that would be very easy to visualize. All right, now our question was, can we create an anonymous user, or can we only modify ACL? I think by anonymous you meant so that everyone can do that, not a specific user. right? If I understood the connection, the question correctly, yes, you can do for everyone, but that would be absolutely not OPSEC safe not safe for your target environment. So I believe you can do that, do everyone, but to be honest, I've never tried that. Right? So we are just 15 minutes short of end of the session. So let's not go for a break. All right. Now let's go for enumeration of trusts. Now, trust is a relationship between two domains or forests that allow users from one domain or forest to access resources in the other one. Now, trusts can be automatic or explicitly established. TDOs, or trusted domain objects, represent the trust relationships in a domain. So, properties of trusts. Trust direction. So a trust could be either one way, that is unidirectional, where users in the trusted domain can access resources in the trusting domain, but the other way around is not true. In a bidirectional or two-way trust, users from both the domains can access resources in the other domain. So why is it important to understand? If you understand this, let's say if there is a trust relationship like this, you will like to access or compromise users in the trusting domain so that you can access resources on the other way around. Right? Now, more trust properties, transitivity. So a trust could be transitive or non-transitive. The session is 2.5 hours, just to clear out any confusion. Right? It is the Azure one that is 3.5 hours, not this one. So what is trust transitivity? You can understand that very easily, like we have read transitivity in algebra. If what is transitivity in algebra? If A is equals to B and B is equals to C, that means A is equals to C as well. That is what transitivity in case of trusts as well. If there is a bidirectional trust relationship between domain A and B, and there is a bidirectional trust relationship between domain B and C, then it is a bidirectional trust relationship between domain A and C as well. This is the default intra-forest trust relationships for tree root and parent-child. Any tree root or parent-child trust relationship is always bidirectional transitive. What is an example of a non-transitive trust? Of course, that cannot be extended to other domains in the forest. Or what is this one? This is the default trust between two domains in different forests, in case of an external trust. What are types of trusts? There are some default or automatic trust like parent-child. For example, in our target environment, there is a parent-child trust relationship between MoneyCorp and our current domain, $corp.moneycorp. And similarly, between $corp and US.$corp. And then there is a tree root trust as well. Parent-child is something like this. Tree root is when a tree is added to the root of a forest tree, to a forest tree. Now, why is this important to understand? Why are we discussing transitivity? Let's say these are A, B, and C, and Y and Z. Tree 2 is a different tree, not a different forest. Now, why is understanding trusts important for us? Let's say if here domain B is compromised. This is a single forest, please keep this in mind. If domain B is compromised, thanks to this trust relationship, an attacker can jump from here to here, then from A to Y, and then from Y to Z. And it would be working as intended. There is nothing that you can do to stop that. All right. So that was about an intra-forest trust, that is trusts within a forest boundary. Now, what are external trusts? External trusts are trusts between two different forests, but not between the forest roots. So this, if there was a trust like this, that would be called forest trust, not the external trust. Any trust between domains in two different forests where at least one of the domain is not forest root is called external trust. Like this one. This trust is an external trust. An external trust, of course, needs to be explicitly created. It is not created automatically. Could be one way or two way. Right? And finally, forest trusts are trusts between root domains of forests. Right? Forest trusts cannot be extended to a third forest. That is, if there is a trust relationship between forest 1 and forest 2, and forest 2 and forest 3, that does not mean that forest 1 and forest 3 would have a trust relationship as well. However, you can make them transitive within the domains of the forest. What does that mean? That means it is possible to set up a forest root like this, that a user in this domain can access resources in this domain. Now, why are we discussing all of these trusts? Mapping trusts gives us a very good idea of the attack surface of the target organization just by running a couple of commands. The question is, in the diagram, can forest 3 access forest 1? No, it cannot. You have to explicitly set up another trust. By default, it won't be there. So why are we discussing this? This gives us a very good idea of the attack surface at a very high level, attack surface of the target environment. For example, if I run this, let's say, if I run get domain trust, what do we have here? There are 3 trust relationships. Our current domain has a trust relationship with forest root, with its child domain, and also to an external forest. That trust also is bidirectional. So just by running this command, we know that if we compromise the current environment, we would be able to compromise these two and probably some resources here as well. Not only that, because there is a trust relationship with an external forest, we can actually extract information from that too. All the enumeration commands that we have seen up to now would work against Eurocop.local as well, thanks to the trust relationship. Why is it possible? Because thanks to this trust relationship, we have almost the privileges equivalent to the authenticated user's FSP in the Eurocop.local. So we can request all the information, users, groups, ACLs, and whatnot, computers, whatever we have seen up to now. It's called trust for a reason, right? Right now, Eurocop.local trusts and honors TGTs or requests from $COP. So you can talk to Eurocop.local only if there is a trust relationship. Otherwise, your domain would not even know that there is a domain called, there is a forest called Eurocop.local. All right, so we can list all the domains trusts for the current domain. We can get details about the current forest. We can get details about all the domains in the forest. So if I run, for example, get forest here, I get some information about the forest. We can list for the global catalog for forests, and we can also map trusts for the forest. But because ours is a small environment, there is actually no need to enumerate them separately. The question is, what is the difference between trust relationship between $COP and MoneyCorp and $COP and Eurocop? It is a big difference. The trust relationship between $COP and MoneyCorp is a within forest trust, an intra-forest trust, created automatically, no way to restrict access. Same goes for the trust relationship between $COP and US.COP. However, the trust relationship between $COP and Eurocop is this, SID filtering. That is what makes this an external trust. All right, and this brings us to our learning objective 4. Enumerate all domains in the MoneyCorp.local forest, map the trusts of the $COP.MoneyCorp.local domain, map external trusts in MoneyCorp.local, and identify external trusts of $COP. Can you enumerate trusts for a trusting forest? Let's try this. To get all the domains in the forest, we can use get forest domain. So as we know, just 3 domains. Second one we have been looking at repeatedly, map the trusts of the current domain, get domain trust. The third one is to to map external trusts in the MoneyCorp.local forest. So for that, we can run this. So what are we doing? We list all the domains in the current forest, and for each of them, we list the trust relationship. And for each of the trust relationship, we list only the one that has filter SIDS property. That is only the external trust, not even the forest trust. So for all of the domains in our current forest, there is just one external trust that is between $COP and Eurocop. All right, and the final one is, can we enumerate trusts for a trusting forest, for an external forest? Yes, if you try the same command or the similar command against Eurocop.local, you would see that Eurocop.local has a trust relation, has 2 trust relationships. One external trust relationship with $COP, one internal within forest trust relationship with EU.Eurocop. Right? So that was about learning objective 4. Now, the last thing that I would like to cover I wanted actually to cover this and local privilege escalation, but because this was the first session, we lagged behind a bit, like just by 15 minutes or so, but we'll cover that in the next session. Nothing to worry about. Now, one last thing that I would like to discuss, will take just a minute, is whatever enumeration we have done up to now, other than the share hunting, has been pretty harmless, mixes really well with the existing traffic in the domain. And it is really hard, if not impossible, but hard to find out if there is any malicious activity. That is hard to generate an anomaly. Now, let's take a look at a bit of intrusive enumeration. Let's see let's take this scenario. We want to find all machines in the current domain where the current user has local admin access. A pretty interesting enumeration technique, right? If you've compromised a domain user, you may like to check if there is a machine where this user has local admin privileges. How can you do that? You can use find local admin access, or you can use find WMI local admin access, or find PS remoting local admin access. All of these work on the same concept. This uses the SC query handle. This uses WMI. This uses PS remoting. The idea is, when you run this command, your machine or a request goes to the DC and gets a list of computers. And then the process or a request goes to each and every machine in the entire domain and checks if the current user has local admin access. This could be very fruitful, but very noisy. You would leave a 4624 log on and 4634 log off on the DC, which is fine. All the users leave it all the time. But not only that, you will leave a 4624 and a 4634 on all the machines in the domain, each machine. So even if it is a small to medium sized environment, you will cause a network spike probably. And also you will leave 4624 and 4634 in quick succession. Right? So the ideal way of using this is that you use all of these tools support a computer file parameter. So you pass a list of, let's say, a couple of 100 machines at a time. That's it. All right. So that is how you can hunt for local admin privileges. That is, if your current user has local admin privileges. All right. Any questions on whatever we have discussed up to now? A question is there a way to find effective permissions for a security principal? I don't think, I'm not aware of anything in PowerView for that, Saif, but Bloodhound is pretty useful for that. And you can also use take a look at ADACL scan. That would also not show you the effective permissions. Bloodhound is your best bet for that. I'll share the recording probably within half an hour, as soon as Zoom is done processing that, but no promises, right? The legally binding time is within a couple of days. I mean, that's what we promised, but that would be within half an hour. All right, any questions? No questions? I just answered that. Okay, so because there are no more questions, I'll say you goodbye till the next session. And of course, please As I said, please feel free to try stuff in the lab, ask questions. Remember, there are no stupid questions. There are some lazy questions. So yeah, but we answer lazy questions as well. So you can reach out to the lab team. You can ask on Discord as well. I stay pretty active on Discord. And see you in the next session and see you on Discord. All right, then see you. Bye-bye.